Snow fell in deadly silence as red and blue lights slashed through the darkness, illuminating 6-year-old Lily Morgan's terrified face. She pressed her small palm against the frosted window, counting the police cruisers surrounding their cabin. 6. All with officers crouching behind open doors, weapons drawn. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over Storm's low growl. The massive German shepherd pressed protectively against her leg while Thunder stood sentinel at the door. Michael Morgan pulled his daughter back from the window, his doctor's hands steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Richard Blackwell," boomed a voice through a megaphone. "We have the house surrounded. Come out with your hands up." A shadow moved in their kitchen. "When I say run," Michael whispered to Lily, "take the dogs and go to the basement." How did bringing in 2 freezing dogs lead to this? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 24 hours earlier, Minnesota had transformed into a perfect Christmas card scene. Fat snowflakes drifted lazily from a pewter sky, blanketing Pine Hollow Road in pristine white. 6-year-old Lily Morgan watched from her bedroom window as the world disappeared beneath winter's quiet blanket. In most homes, such weather brought hot chocolate and fireplace stories. In the Morgan cabin, it meant another night alone. "I've got to go back to the hospital, sweetie," her father had said that morning, his surgical scrubs already on, car keys jingling impatiently in his hand. "Mrs. Thompson will stay until bedtime." Lily nodded without looking at him. This was their routine since Mommy went to heaven 2 years ago. Daddy worked. Lily waited. Sometimes it felt like they were 2 planets orbiting the same sun, never quite connecting. Dr. Michael Morgan was the best trauma surgeon at Northridge Memorial. Everyone said so. What they didn't say was how grief had hollowed him, turned his once warm eyes into distant galaxies. He saved strangers every day, but couldn't heal the fracture in his own home. Mrs. Thompson was nice enough. The 78-year-old former school teacher moved with arthritic grace around their kitchen, her silver hair always perfectly pinned, smelling of peppermint and wisdom. "The good Lord never gives us more than we can handle," she'd say whenever Lily asked why bad things happened. Today, she'd added, "But sometimes I wish he didn't trust us quite so much," as she glanced at the weather report showing the approaching blizzard. By 4 o'clock, the gentle snowfall had transformed into something angrier. Wind howled between the pine trees surrounding their isolated cabin. "I should head home before it gets worse," Mrs. Thompson said, zipping her parka. "Your daddy called. The hospital's activating emergency protocols for the storm. He'll be home as soon as he can, but it might be morning." Lily clutched her inhaler tighter. Her asthma always worsened in winter, and being alone made her chest feel tight in a different way. "Remember the rules?" Mrs. Thompson asked at the door. "Lock everything. Don't open for anyone. Use the emergency phone if I need help." Lily recited, fingering the small dog-shaped USB pendant hanging around her neck, the last birthday gift from her mother. "Smart as a whip," Mrs. Thompson smiled. "Your mama would be proud." After the elderly woman left, Lily methodically checked every lock, then settled by the fireplace where her father had built a careful fire behind the safety screen. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, rattling windows like angry fists demanding entry. At 6 years old, Lily Morgan knew about loss. She understood that sometimes people left and never came back, like Mommy. Sometimes they disappeared temporarily, like Daddy into his work. And sometimes things you loved vanished without explanation, like her puppy Shadow, who disappeared the same winter as Mommy. What Lily didn't know was that tonight, something lost would find its way home, and nothing would ever be the same again. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 7, each chime reverberating through the empty house. Lily had built herself a fortress of blankets near the fireplace, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest as she flipped through a worn copy of Winnie the Pooh. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper the familiar words, "Sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in your heart." The wind outside had become a living thing, howling and clawing at the cabin. Tree branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers, and Lily pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. That's when she heard it, a sound different from the storm. Not the wind, not the trees. A scratching at the front door, followed by a whimper so faint she almost missed it. Lily froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Hello?" she called, her voice small in the vast emptiness of the house. The scratching came again, more desperate this time. Another whimper, then a soft, pitiful yelp that seemed to cut through the howling wind. Mrs. Thompson's warnings echoed in her mind. "Don't open the door for anyone." But this didn't sound like a person. It sounded like an animal in pain. Lily thought of her mother's favorite saying, "Kindness matters most when it's hardest to give." Taking a deep breath, she dragged a kitchen chair to the front door and climbed up to peek through the window. What she saw made her gasp. Two German shepherds huddled together on the porch, their powerful bodies trembling violently. Ice crystals clung to their thick fur, and the larger one had a visible wound on its flank, blood frozen in crimson streaks against black and tan fur. Their intelligent eyes looked directly at her, pleading, exhausted, desperate. "Oh my goodness," Lily whispered, scrambling down from the chair. She stood at the door, hand on the deadbolt, having an intense internal debate. Breaking rules meant trouble. But leaving them outside meant she couldn't even think about it. The temperature was dropping by the minute. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," she murmured, turning the lock and cracking the door open against the force of the wind. The moment the gap was wide enough, the dogs limped inside, bringing with them the smell of wet fur, pine, and something metallic, blood. Once inside, the larger dog positioned itself between Lily and the still-open door, as if protecting her from the outside world, while the smaller one pushed the door closed with its nose. "You're hurt," Lily said, noticing how they left bloody paw prints on the hardwood floor. "I'll help you." She hurried to the bathroom, where her father kept a meticulously organized first aid kit. As a doctor's daughter, Lily knew more about cleaning wounds than most children her age. She gathered antiseptic wipes, gauze, and bandages, then returned to find the dogs exactly where she'd left them, watching her with an intensity that seemed almost human. The larger dog, with a black face and tan body, allowed her to examine its wound, a deep gash that looked like it came from something sharp, not animal teeth or claws. Around its neck, partially hidden by thick fur, was what looked like a broken electronic device. "This might sting," she warned as she gently cleaned the wound. The dog didn't flinch, watching her with eyes that seemed to hold secrets. The smaller dog, nearly all black, with just touches of brown on its legs, kept moving to the windows, looking out into the storm before returning to Lily's side. Both animals moved with a precision and discipline that seemed strange for strays. After bandaging the wound with colorful Band-Aids, the only kind in the medicine cabinet, Lily found leftover meatloaf in the refrigerator. The dogs ate carefully, not gulping like hungry strays, but taking measured bites, their eyes continually scanning the room, the doors, the windows. "You need names," Lily decided, settling back into her blanket fort. "You're Storm," she told the larger one with the wound, "because you came in from the storm, and you're Thunder," she said to the smaller, more vigilant dog. To her surprise, both dogs perked their ears at these names, as if they recognized them. The coincidence made her smile. As Lily stroked Storm's thick fur, her fingers found something unusual, a small crescent-shaped scar near his ear. Her hand froze. Her throat tightened. Shadow, her puppy who'd disappeared 2 years ago, had an identical scar from an accident with a fence. "Shadow?" she whispered, hardly daring to hope. Storm's ears twitched, and for just a moment his tail wagged tentatively. Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she buried her face in the dog's fur. It couldn't be possible. Could it? Shadow had been just a puppy when he vanished, yet something about this dog's eyes seemed hauntingly familiar. As the storm raged outside, Lily felt safer than she had in years. The dogs formed a protective semicircle around her, their bodies warm against the chill that seeped through the cabin walls. For the first time since losing her mother, the emptiness inside her began to fill with something that felt like hope. What Lily couldn't know was that these weren't ordinary strays seeking shelter. They were harbingers of a truth long buried, a truth that would soon bring danger right to her doorstep. The grandfather clock struck 10, its chimes muffled by the howling wind. Lily had drifted into an uneasy sleep, nestled between the two German shepherds, her small hand resting on Storm's neck. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the living room walls. Thunder's head suddenly jerked up, ears rigid, eyes fixed on the kitchen door that led to the back porch. A low growl rumbled in his chest, barely audible but enough to wake Lily. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Storm was already on his feet, positioning himself between Lily and the kitchen doorway. His posture had changed completely. No longer a wounded animal, but a soldier at attention, hackles raised along his spine. That's when Lily heard it. The soft scrape of metal against metal. Someone was trying the back door lock. Her breath caught in her throat as she remembered her father's warnings about strangers. The cabin was isolated, the nearest neighbor a quarter-mile away. No one should be at their door during a blizzard at this hour. Thunder let out a warning bark, sharp and authoritative. The sound at the door immediately stopped, replaced by silence so complete that Lily could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Maybe it was just the wind, she whispered to herself, but the dog's behavior told her otherwise. They remained alert, muscles tense beneath their thick fur, eyes never leaving the kitchen doorway. For what felt like eternity, nothing happened. Then came the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Thunder shot toward the kitchen like an arrow released from a bow, Storm following a split second later. Lily heard barking, snarling, a man's startled curse. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. Her chest tightened in panic, each breath becoming more difficult. Asthma. Not now, please, not now. Her inhaler was on the side table just a few feet away, but fear had frozen her in place. From the kitchen came the sound of more glass breaking, then a blast of frigid air as the storm found entry through a broken window. Thunder reappeared in the living room doorway, checking on Lily before returning to the kitchen. Storm circled the entire first floor, moving from window to window with military precision, checking each entry point. Lily's breathing grew more labored. Spots danced before her eyes as she tried to reach her inhaler. Her fingers brushed against it, knocking it to the floor. In her rising panic, she almost missed the sight of Storm returning to the living room. The dog surveyed her for a moment, seeming to understand her distress. To her amazement, he lowered his muzzle to the floor, gently picked up the inhaler between his teeth, and brought it to her. "Good boy," she wheezed, taking the medicine with trembling hands and inhaling deeply. As the medication opened her airways, Lily crawled toward the landline phone on the side table. With shaking fingers, she dialed 911 as her father had taught her. 911, what's your emergency? Came a woman's calm voice. Someone's trying to break into our house, Lily whispered, her voice still raspy from the asthma attack. My daddy's not home. I'm alone with 2 dogs. What's your address, sweetheart? 42 Pine Hollow Road, Lily answered. Please hurry. Are you somewhere safe? Can you lock yourself in a room? The dogs are protecting me. They scared the person away, but they broke a window. We'll send officers right away. the dispatcher assured her. "Can you stay on the line with me?" But at that moment, the lights flickered and went out. The phone went dead in her hand, leaving her in darkness, save for the faint glow of dying embers in the fireplace. Tears slid down Lily's cheeks as fear threatened to overwhelm her. The storm outside seemed to mock her with its ferocity, and somewhere in the darkness, a stranger might still be waiting. A warm weight pressed against her side. Thunder, his fur still bristling, but his presence comforting. Storm completed their small circle, lying down on her other side. Between them, Lily felt her panic begin to recede. "You're good dogs," she whispered, burying her face in Storm's fur. "Thank you." Thunder's ears suddenly pricked again, his attention fixed on the front windows. Outside, a vehicle's headlights cut through the snow, briefly illuminating the living room before going dark. Lily's heart leapt. Could it be her father coming home early? But Storm's renewed growl told her otherwise. From outside came the sound of footsteps crunching through snow, circling the house, then silence. The temperature in the house was dropping rapidly with the broken window and no electricity for heat. Lily pulled a blanket tighter around herself, shivering. The dogs pressed closer, sharing their warmth. "We need to stay quiet," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the dogs or herself. Storm suddenly raised his head, staring at the ceiling, then at Lily, then back at the ceiling. "What is it, boy?" she asked. The dog stood, gently tugging at her sleeve with his teeth, pulling her toward the hallway that led to the basement door. Thunder joined in, nudging her legs from behind. Lily had never seen dogs act this way outside of movies. It was as if they were trying to tell her something specific, something urgent. "You want me to go to the basement?" she asked in disbelief. Both dogs stared at her intently. The basement had been her father's workshop before her mother died. Now it mostly stored old furniture and holiday decorations. But it was also the most secure room in the house, with just one small window, too small for an adult to enter. "Okay," she whispered, grabbing her inhaler and the flashlight they kept by the fireplace for emergencies. The dogs led her to the basement door, waiting as she pulled it open. The wooden stairs disappeared into darkness below. Lily hesitated, her fear of the dark momentarily outweighing her fear of intruders. Storm nudged her forward gently, then took the lead, descending the stairs with careful steps. Thunder waited behind her, clearly intending for her to go between them. With one last look at the darkened living room, Lily followed Storm down the stairs, Thunder bringing up the rear. What she didn't see was the shadow that passed by the front window, or the gloved hand that tested the lock on the front door. She didn't see the face that peered inside, a face that, had she seen it, might have seemed oddly familiar. In the basement, Lily found a corner behind her father's old workbench. The dogs created a protective barrier around her, their bodies alert but calm. "We'll be okay," she whispered, more to convince herself than them. "The police are coming. Daddy will come home. We just need to wait." As the night deepened and the storm raged on, Lily Morgan huddled in her basement fortress, protected by two animals who seemed to understand far more than any dogs should. What none of them knew was that by morning the truth would begin to unravel, a truth that had been buried for 2 long years, since the winter night when Lily's world had first fallen apart. Dawn broke over Minnesota with aching slowness, the storm finally exhausting itself into gentle snowfall. The world outside the Morgan cabin was transformed. Drifts piled against walls, trees bowed under white weight, the road completely obliterated under a pristine blanket. Lily woke stiff and cold in the basement corner. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. Why wasn't she in her bed? Then memory returned with a rush. The dogs, the broken window, the intruder in the night. Thunder still stood guard at the base of the stairs, while Storm had remained pressed against her side throughout the night. Both dogs' ears perked up at the sound of vehicles approaching outside. "Someone's here," Lily whispered, clutching Storm's fur. Voices carried faintly through the floorboards above, too many to make out individual words. Boots stomped on the porch, then the distinctive creak of the front door opening. Had the intruder returned with others? Thunder let out a single bark, as if announcing their position. Lily tensed, but Storm nudged her hand reassuringly. "Lily?" A familiar voice called out, frantic with worry. "Lily! Daddy!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "Daddy! We're down here!" Footsteps thundered across the floor above, then the basement door flew open. Michael Morgan stood silhouetted against the morning light, his hospital scrubs wrinkled from a night of emergency surgeries, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. "Lily!" he gasped, rushing down the stairs. She ran to him, nearly tripping in her haste. He caught her in his arms, lifting her against his chest with a sob of relief. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" His doctor's hands were already checking her for injuries, his eyes scanning her face. "I'm okay," she assured him. "The dogs protected me." For the first time, Michael seemed to register the 2 German shepherds watching him warily from the corner. His body tensed. "Lily, get behind me," he said quietly, setting her down. "No, Daddy, they're good. They saved me when someone tried to break in." Before Michael could respond, heavy footsteps descended the basement stairs. A uniformed police officer appeared, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon. "Dr. Morgan, is she—" The officer stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as they fell on the 2 dogs. "I'll be damned," he whispered. "Wilson, get down here." More footsteps, and an older officer with salt-and-pepper hair appeared. "What is it, Reynolds? Did you find—" His words died as he spotted the German shepherds. "Storm? Thunder?" Officer Wilson said softly, his weathered face showing disbelief. The dogs' ears perked up at their names. Thunder gave a soft whine of recognition. "You know these dogs?" Michael asked, still keeping Lily partially behind him. "They're ours," Wilson said, his voice thick with emotion. "K9 unit. Went missing 3 days ago when their handler was shot during an operation." Lily looked from the officer to the dogs in confusion. "But I named them Storm and Thunder last night." Wilson knelt slowly, extending his hand palm up toward the animals. "Those are their actual names, sweetheart. They're police dogs, the best in our K9 unit." The dogs approached Wilson cautiously, sniffing his hand. Thunder gave his fingers a quick lick of recognition, but both animals immediately returned to Lily's side. "I've never seen them bond with someone so quickly," Wilson remarked, studying Lily with newfound interest. "They're usually strictly professional with anyone but their handler." Michael ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the situation. "Let me get this straight. These are police dogs that somehow ended up on our doorstep during the blizzard?" "Not somehow," came another voice from the top of the stairs. A man in a detective's jacket descended, his presence immediately causing both dogs to stiffen. "They were separated from their handler during a drug bust gone wrong. We've been searching for them since Officer Parker was shot." "Parker?" Michael's head snapped up. "Kevin Parker. He's my patient. Came in 3 nights ago with a GSW to the chest." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly. "Small world, Doctor. I'm Detective Richard Blackwell, Narcotics Division. I've been leading the investigation." Something in Blackwell's tone made Michael instinctively tighten his grip on Lily's shoulder. The dogs seemed to sense the tension, moving to position themselves between the Morgans and the detective. "How's he doing?" Blackwell asked, his eyes never leaving the dogs. "Stable, still unconscious." Michael's professional mask slipped into place. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters. "Lucky man," Blackwell said, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. Officer Wilson was examining Storm closely now, noticing the bandage on his flank. "You treated him?" he asked Lily. She nodded. "He was bleeding. I used Daddy's first aid kit." "Smart girl," Wilson smiled, then frowned as his fingers found something in Storm's thick fur. "What's this?" From around Storm's neck, Wilson carefully extracted what appeared to be a small USB drive attached to the broken tracking collar. "Son of a gun," he whispered, holding it up. Blackwell. Parker must have attached the evidence to Storm's collar when he realized they were compromised. The detective moved forward quickly, too quickly. Both dogs immediately growled, backing Wilson away from Blackwell. "Easy," Wilson said, more to the detective than to the dogs. "They're still on duty mode." But his eyes had narrowed, studying the animal's reaction to his colleague. More officers had gathered at the top of the stairs, watching the scene unfold. One called down, "Sir, we've secured the perimeter. Found evidence of forced entry at the rear window and footprints circling the house." Lily tugged at her father's scrubs. "Daddy, someone tried to break in last night. The dogs chased them away." Michael's face darkened. "You were alone during a break-in. Why didn't you call me?" "I tried to call 911, but the power went out and the phone died," Lily explained, her voice small. "The storm knocked out power and phone lines across 3 counties, Wilson explained. "We only got her call this morning when systems came back online." "Sir," another officer called from upstairs, "we found something you should see." Wilson excused himself, climbing the stairs with the USB drive carefully secured in an evidence bag. Detective Blackwell remained, his gaze alternating between the dogs and the Morgans with an intensity that made Michael uncomfortable. "So, Dr. Morgan," Blackwell said casually, "you work at Northridge Memorial?" "Trauma surgeon," Michael confirmed stiffly. "Look, my daughter's been through a lot. Can we continue this upstairs?" "Of course." Blackwell smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "After you." As they climbed the stairs, Michael carrying Lily while the dogs followed closely, Blackwell's voice drifted up behind them. "You know, you look familiar, Doctor. Have we met before?" Michael paused at the top of the stairs, a strange expression crossing his face as he turned to look at the detective more carefully. "I don't think so." The living room was now crowded with police officers. Through the windows, Lily could see more patrol cars had arrived, their lights still flashing against the snow. Officer Wilson was examining something on the kitchen counter, shards of glass from the broken window, and beside them, a glove. "Found this caught on the window frame," he explained. "Black tactical glove, high-end, not something your average burglar wears." Blackwell moved to examine it, but again the dogs positioned themselves in his path, their behavior becoming increasingly hostile toward the detective. "What's wrong with them?" Michael asked, noticing how Storm's hackles had raised, his teeth partially bared toward Blackwell. Wilson was watching this interaction with increasing suspicion. These dogs were trained by Richard before he moved to narcotics. They should be familiar with him. He turned to Blackwell. "Something's not adding up here." The detective's posture shifted subtly. "They're clearly traumatized. Parker's shooting, the storm, being separated from their handler. It's affecting their behavior." A commotion at the front door drew everyone's attention. A young officer burst in, breathless from running. "Sir, the hospital just called. Officer Parker's awake." Wilson's face lit up. "That's great news. There's more," the young officer continued. "He's asking for you specifically. Says he needs to tell you something about the operation. Says there was an inside man." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Blackwell, whose hand had drifted to rest near his concealed shoulder holster. "Inside man?" Wilson repeated slowly, his gaze never leaving Blackwell. "Did he say who?" "Not over the phone, sir. Just said to trust no one until you speak with him directly." Thunder let out a low growl, moving closer to Lily as if sensing imminent danger. Storm remained focused on Blackwell, tracking his every movement. Wilson's hand moved to his own weapon. "Richard, he said quietly. "I think you should surrender your firearm while we sort this out." The detective's face hardened. "You can't possibly think I'm involved in this." "I'm not thinking anything yet," Wilson replied evenly. "But these dogs were trained to recognize threats, and they've identified you as one. That's enough for me to be cautious." Blackwell's gaze darted around the room, calculating his options. Too many officers, too little space to maneuver. "Fine," he said finally, slowly removing his weapon and placing it on a nearby table. "This is ridiculous, but I understand protocol." Wilson nodded to another officer who moved to collect the weapon. As he reached for it, Blackwell suddenly lunged toward Lily, grabbing her arm and yanking her away from Michael. "Nobody move!" he shouted, producing a second, smaller gun from an ankle holster. Everything happened at once. Michael dove toward his daughter. Officers drew their weapons, and Storm launched himself through the air, a 70-pound missile of fur and muscle, striking Blackwell squarely in the chest. Lily screamed as she fell, her father catching her before she hit the floor. Thunder positioned himself protectively in front of them, while Storm and Blackwell crashed into the dining table, sending chairs flying. The detective's gun discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. Before he could aim again, Storm's powerful jaws clamped around his wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon. "Stand down," Wilson ordered, his weapon trained on Blackwell. "It's over, Richard." But as officers moved in to subdue him, Blackwell looked directly at Michael, a strange smile twisting his features. "It's never over, little brother. Not for us." Michael froze, the color draining from his face. "What did you call me?" Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound even as officers handcuffed him. "You really don't recognize me?" "I'm hurt, Mikey. After all, what kind of brother forgets his own flesh and blood?" The room fell silent, all eyes moving between the detective and the doctor. "You're not my brother," Michael said, his voice hollow. "My brother died 15 years ago in Afghanistan. Is that what they told you?" Blackwell's smile widened. "Convenient story. But here I am, back from the dead. We have so much catching up to do." Wilson signaled for his officers to remove Blackwell, who continued speaking as they dragged him toward the door. "Ask him about the night Sarah died, Lily. Ask your daddy what really happened to your mommy." The door slammed shut behind them, leaving a stunned silence in the living room. Lily looked up at her father, whose face had gone ashen. "Daddy?" she whispered. "What did he mean?" Michael couldn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the door where Blackwell, a ghost from his past, had disappeared. Storm limped back to Lily's side, pressing against her leg reassuringly. The wound on his flank had reopened during the struggle, fresh blood staining the bandages. Officer Wilson approached them cautiously. "Dr. Morgan, I think we need to talk. But first, let's get your daughter somewhere safe and have someone look at that dog's injury." Michael nodded numbly, gathering Lily into his arms. "Is that man really your brother?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through the chaos of the moment. Michael looked down at his daughter, then at the two dogs who had protected her with their lives. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said finally, "but I intend to find out." Outside, more police vehicles were arriving. The quiet aftermath of the storm was shattered by radios, voices, the machinery of justice grinding into motion. What had begun with a little girl taking in two freezing dogs had somehow unleashed a torrent of secrets long buried under snow and silence. And this was only the beginning. Northridge Memorial Hospital hummed with the controlled chaos typical of a facility that had weathered a major storm. Doctors, nurses, and staff who had been stranded overnight moved with the sluggish determination of the sleep-deprived, while fresh replacements were only beginning to arrive through still treacherous roads. In a small waiting room on the third floor, Lily Morgan sat curled against Mrs. Thompson, who had insisted on coming when Michael called. The elderly woman stroked the child's hair while humming an old hymn, her arthritic fingers never pausing in their gentle rhythm. "How much longer, Mrs. Thompson?" Lily asked, her blue eyes fixed on the door where her father had disappeared nearly an hour ago. "Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet," Mrs. Thompson replied, quoting one of her endless supply of old-fashioned sayings. "Your daddy needs to talk with the officers, and you, young lady, need to rest." But rest seemed impossible. Every time Lily closed her eyes, she saw the detective's face, a face that apparently belonged to an uncle she never knew existed. She saw Storm launching himself through the air, heard the terrible sound of the gun firing. "I want storm and thunder," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Mrs. Thompson sighed. "But animals aren't allowed in hospitals, except for special circumstances." Officer Wilson had taken the dogs, promising they would receive proper veterinary care. "They performed their duty perfectly," he told Lily. "Now they need medical attention, just like people do after a tough job." The waiting room door swung open, and Michael entered, looking even more exhausted than before. His surgical scrubs had been replaced with borrowed clothes that hung loosely on his frame, a reminder of how much weight he'd lost since Sarah's death. "Daddy!" Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He lifted her up, holding her close for a long moment before meeting Mrs. Thompson's questioning gaze over Lily's shoulder. "Eleanor, thank you for coming," he said. "Would you mind if I spoke with Lily alone for a moment?" "Of course." The elderly woman gathered her purse. "I could use a cup of that terrible hospital coffee anyway. Been drinking it since the Eisenhower administration. Might as well keep the tradition alive." She patted Lily's back as she passed. "Remember what I told you, child. The truth may hurt for a little while, but a lie hurts forever." When the door closed behind her, Michael carried Lily to the small couch and sat with her on his lap. For a long moment he simply held her, his chin resting on her head. "Lily Pad," he began, using the nickname that had been largely absent since her mother's death. "I need to tell you some things that are going to be hard to hear. About our family. About your mom." Lily nodded against his chest, feeling the strange hammering of his heart. "The man today, Detective Blackwell. His real name is Richard Morgan. He is my brother." Michael's voice sounded hollow, as if coming from the bottom of a well. "I thought he died overseas many years ago. That's what the Army told us." "So he's my uncle?" Lily asked, trying to wrap her young mind around this revelation. "Biologically, yes." Michael's jaw tightened. "But family is more than blood, Lily Pad. It's about trust and love and protection." Through the window, snow had begun falling again, gentler now without the storm's earlier fury but persistent in its accumulation. Why did he hurt Officer Parker? Why did he try to hurt us? Michael closed his eyes briefly. How did one explain corruption, jealousy, and betrayal to a 6-year-old? "Richard was always different," he began carefully. "When we were kids, he felt our parents favored me. Maybe they did, I don't know. He joined the Army straight out of high school while I went to medical school. When we received news of his death in Afghanistan, I was devastated." Michael's eyes drifted to the window, watching the falling snow. "But he wasn't dead. Somehow he came back with a new identity, became a police officer, and somewhere along the way, he started breaking the laws he was supposed to enforce." "The police think he was helping bad people sell drugs," Lily said, surprising her father. "I heard Officer Wilson talking." Michael nodded. "That appears to be the case. When Officer Parker discovered what Richard was doing, Richard shot him to keep his secret safe." Lily digested this information with the solemn contemplation unique to children, accepting the unacceptable with a simplicity adults had long lost. "But what did he mean about Mommy?" she asked finally, her small voice barely audible. Michael's entire body tensed. This was the question he'd been dreading. I don't know exactly what he meant, he said slowly, choosing his words with painful care. But Officer Wilson told me they're investigating whether the accident that took Mom from us might not have been an accident. Lily pulled back to look at her father's face, her eyes wide. You mean Uncle Richard hurt Mommy? They don't know for sure yet, Michael said quickly, though his voice caught. But there's evidence suggesting he might have been involved. The door opened again, and Officer Wilson entered, his weathered face grave. Behind him came a man in a white coat, Dr. Evans, the veterinarian who had treated Storm and Thunder. Sorry to interrupt, Wilson said, but I thought you'd want to know right away. We've confirmed from the USB drive that Richard was indeed the inside man Parker discovered. He's been feeding information to the Brennan drug cartel for at least 3 years. Michael nodded, processing this information while keeping a protective arm around Lily. There's more, Wilson continued. We've requested the files on your wife's accident be reopened. The preliminary evidence is concerning. What evidence? Michael asked sharply. Wilson glanced at Lily, clearly hesitant to speak freely in front of the child. It's okay, Michael said. She deserves to know. Wilson sighed. The brake lines on Sarah's car were cut. It was made to look like they ruptured naturally, but our forensic team is finding inconsistencies in the original report. Michael closed his eyes, a wave of nausea washing over him. All this time, he'd believed Sarah's death was a tragic accident, black ice, a guardrail that failed, a terrible coincidence of timing. The thought that it might have been deliberate, orchestrated by his own brother. Why would he do that? He whispered, more to himself than anyone else. We don't know yet, Wilson admitted, but we intend to find out. Richard's not talking, but the evidence is mounting. Dr. Evans stepped forward. I thought you might want to know about the dogs, he said, redirecting the conversation for Lily's benefit. They're doing well. Storm's wound has been properly treated. He'll need to take it easy for a few days, but there's no permanent damage. Can I see them? Lily asked immediately, sitting up straighter. The veterinarian smiled. That's actually why I'm here. These particular dogs are unusual. They're refusing to cooperate with anyone. Storm pulled out his IV twice, and Thunder won't let anyone near him without growling. What does that mean? Michael asked. It means, Wilson interjected, that they're demonstrating a level of attachment to your daughter that's unprecedented in police canines. Dr. Evans thinks they might calm down if they see her. Please, Daddy, Lily pleaded. Michael hesitated. After everything that had happened, all he wanted was to take his daughter home, lock the doors, and keep her safe from the world. But home was now a crime scene, and safety had become a relative concept. Where are they? He asked finally. In my clinic across the street, Dr. Evans explained. We could bring Lily over for just a few minutes. It might help the dogs, and he hesitated. It might help her too. Michael looked down at his daughter's pleading face and felt something shift inside him, the protective wall he'd built after Sarah's death cracking just enough to let something else through. Trust, hope, maybe even healing. All right, he conceded, but I'm coming too. 20 minutes later, they entered the veterinary clinic's recovery area. 2 large kennels had been placed side by side, containing Storm and Thunder. Both dogs immediately stood at attention when Lily entered, their tails wagging with restrained enthusiasm. Storm! Thunder! Lily rushed forward, only to be gently held back by Dr. Evans. Careful now, he cautioned. They're still working dogs, and Storm has fresh stitches, but the warning proved unnecessary. As the kennel doors were opened, both dogs approached Lily with perfect discipline, sitting at her feet and waiting for permission before gently nuzzling her hands. They're so well behaved with her, Dr. Evans marveled. It's like they see her as their handler. Wilson watched thoughtfully, Parker was their official handler, but they were originally trained by Richard. I wonder if that's created some kind of conflict in their training. As Wilson spoke, the clinic door opened, and a nurse wheeled in a man in a hospital gown. Officer Kevin Parker, pale but alert, an IV pole attached to his wheelchair. "You shouldn't be out of bed," Wilson scolded, though there was no real admonishment in his tone. "Try stopping me," Parker replied with a weak smile. "I heard my dogs were giving everyone hell." At the sound of his voice, both Storm and Thunder looked up, ears perked in recognition. Yet remarkably, they remained by Lily's side. "They've imprinted on the girl," Parker observed. No jealousy in his voice, only professional interest. "Fascinating." Lily looked up at the injured officer. "Are they your dogs?" "They are." Parker nodded. "We've been partners for 2 years, but it looks like they've found a new friend in you." Storm pressed closer to Lily, his large body leaning protectively against her small frame. Michael watched with mixed emotions. Gratitude for the animal's protective instinct, confusion over its unusual attachment to his daughter. "There's something else," Dr. Evans said, approaching with a small plastic evidence bag. "We found this embedded under Storm's skin near the tracking device." Inside the bag was a tiny microchip, smaller than a grain of rice. "We thought it might be a standard ID chip, but it's not. It's some kind of storage device." The veterinarian handed the bag to Wilson. "Your tech team might want to look at it." Wilson examined the chip with a frown. "Secondary evidence backup. Parker, did you place this?" Parker shook his head. "Never seen it before." A sharp intake of breath from Michael drew everyone's attention. He was staring at Storm with dawning recognition. "Dr. Morgan?" Wilson prompted. "The scar on his ear," Michael said, pointing to the crescent-shaped mark visible beneath Storm's fur. "I've seen it before." Lily nodded eagerly. "I told you, Daddy. It's just like Shadow's scar from when he cut himself on the fence." "Shadow?" Parker questioned. "Our dog," Michael explained, his voice tight with emotion. "He disappeared the same winter my wife died. He was just a puppy then, but the marking is identical." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room as the implications settled. "Are you suggesting," Wilson said slowly, "that Storm is actually your missing dog?" "It's impossible," Parker interjected. "Storm came from our official breeding program. His lineage is documented." "Is it?" Wilson turned to him. "Richard was running the canine training program when Storm was brought in. He had complete control over the documentation." Lily had moved closer to Storm, gently running her fingers over the scar. "It is you, isn't it?" she whispered. "You came back to us." As if in response, Storm pressed his muzzle against her cheek. "I want to run a DNA test," Michael said firmly. "I have samples from Shadow's puppyhood, hair from his brush, blood work from his vaccinations in my files at home." "Even if it is your dog," Parker said carefully. "Storm is now a highly trained police K9. He's department property." The word property sent a visible flinch through Michael. Before he could respond, the clinic door burst open and a disheveled Mrs. Thompson rushed in. "Turn on the news," she said breathlessly. "Right now, doctor." Evans grabbed a remote, activating the small television mounted in the corner of the room. The local news was showing live footage of the county jail where police vehicles were gathered in chaotic profusion. Confirmation that Detective Richard Blackwell, also known as Richard Morgan, has escaped custody during transport, the reporter was saying. Authorities believe he had outside help from members of the Brennan cartel. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Police are urging residents, especially in the Pine Hollow area, to remain vigilant and report any sightings immediately. The room went silent. Michael instinctively pulled Lily closer to him, while Storm and Thunder moved to position themselves between the door and the humans they had chosen to protect. "He's coming for the evidence," Parker said grimly, "and for anyone who can testify against him." "We need to move you all to a secure location," Wilson decided, already reaching for his radio. "Now!" Michael looked down at his daughter, then at the dog standing guard beside her. After 2 years of emotional distance, of drowning in his grief while Lily silently bore her own, he felt a fierce clarity cutting through the fog. "No more running," he said quietly. "No more hiding from the truth." "Michael," Mrs. Thompson began, concern etching her weathered face. "My brother took Sarah from us," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. "He took our dog. He took our sense of safety. I won't let him take anything else." Thunder gave a soft growl of agreement, while Storm stood taller, as if sensing the shift in resolve. "What are you suggesting?" Wilson asked cautiously. "Richard wants the evidence and witnesses against him," Michael said. "Let's give him what he wants. On our terms." "You're talking about setting a trap," Parker realized. "Using yourself as bait." "Using ourselves," Michael corrected, looking at his daughter with a question in his eyes. To everyone's surprise, Lily nodded solemnly. "Shadow came back to protect us," she said, resting her hand on Storm's head. "He knows something important." The tiny chip in the evidence bag seemed to take on greater significance. Whatever information it contained, Richard was willing to risk everything to obtain it. "I can't authorize civilian involvement in a police operation," Wilson said, though his tone suggested he was considering the possibility. "You won't have to," Michael replied, "because we're not going to be civilians in this. We're going to be family." "Meaning what exactly?" Parker asked. Michael's expression hardened. "Meaning that when Richard comes looking for us, he won't find victims. He'll find the reckoning he's avoided for too long." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a deceptive blanket of purity. But beneath that pristine surface, secrets were rising to light, pushed upward by truth's inevitable buoyancy, by a brother's betrayal, by a little girl's unwavering faith, and by 2 dogs who had found their way home through storm and shadow. The battle lines were drawn. Richard Morgan had declared war on his own family 2 years ago when he orchestrated Sarah's death. Now, that war would finally reach its conclusion, one way or another. "All right," Wilson conceded finally. "We'll do this your way. But we're going to need a plan." As the adults began discussing strategy, Lily knelt between the 2 dogs, her small arms trying to encircle their powerful necks. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to them. "You came back to make things right." Storm's intelligent eyes met hers with an understanding that transcended words. Whatever happened next, the bond between them would not be broken again. Not by storm, not by darkness, and certainly not by the man who had taken so much from them already. The final confrontation was coming, and this time they would face it together. Sarah Morgan died on a night just like this one. The thought came unbidden to Michael as he stood at the living room window of the safe house, watching snow drift lazily from a sky as black as grief. 2 years had passed since that night, yet the memory remained razor-sharp. The 2 a.m. phone call, the rush to the hospital through a blizzard, the doctor's face when Michael arrived, the words that severed his life into before and after. "I'm sorry, Dr. Morgan. We did everything we could." His fingers absently traced the condensation on the window glass. Behind him, Lily slept on the couch, curled between storm and thunder like a small island protected by furry sentinels. The dog's eyes gleamed in the dim light, tracking Michael's movements with unwavering attention. "You should rest, too," came Mrs. Thompson's soft voice as she entered from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Tomorrow will test us all." Michael accepted the steaming cup with a grateful nod. "I keep thinking about Sarah," he admitted, "about what Richard might have done." Mrs. Thompson settled into an armchair, her arthritic hands wrapped around her mug for warmth. "I've known you since you were Lily's age, Michael Morgan. Known your brother, too." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "Even then, there was something in Richard that worried me. A darkness when he looked at you." "Jealousy," Michael murmured. "My parents always said I was imagining it." "Jealousy is too simple a word for what ailed that boy," Mrs. Thompson replied. "It was more like hunger, like something essential was missing inside him, and he thought taking what you had might fill it." Outside, a police cruiser passed slowly along the street, one of several keeping watch on the safe house. Wilson had stationed officers throughout the neighborhood, visible enough to suggest protection, but discreet enough to avoid broadcasting their exact location. "Did I ever tell you about the day Sarah told me she was pregnant with Lily?" Michael asked suddenly. Mrs. Thompson shook her head, recognizing his need to speak of happier times. "We were having dinner at my parents' house. Richard was there too. This was before his supposed death in Afghanistan." Michael's eyes grew distant. "Sarah waited until dessert, then handed everyone little boxes. Inside each one was a pacifier with a note saying, 'See you in 7 months.'" He smiled at the memory. "My parents were ecstatic. But Richard, for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes, like he was calculating what this meant for him." "Some folks can't stand to see others happy," Mrs. Thompson observed. "Makes their own misery that much harder to bear." Michael moved to sit on the edge of the sofa, gently stroking Lily's hair. After Sarah announced the pregnancy, Richard disappeared for weeks. When he came back, he'd enlisted in the Army. Told everyone he needed purpose, structure. My parents were so proud. "And then came the news of his death," Mrs. Thompson supplied. Michael nodded. "A firefight in Kandahar province, body unrecoverable. We held a memorial service with an empty casket." "While all along he was reinventing himself," Mrs. Thompson said with disgust. "Creating this Richard Blackwell persona." "That's what I can't understand," Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. "How did he do it? The military doesn't just declare someone dead without verification." "Money opens many doors," Mrs. Thompson replied grimly. "And from what Officer Wilson told me, your brother had connections to very wealthy, very dangerous people." Thunder's ears suddenly perked up, his head lifting slightly. Storm remained perfectly still, but his muscles tensed visibly beneath his fur. Both dogs were staring toward the front door. Michael immediately moved to the window, scanning the street. "I don't see anything," he whispered. Mrs. Thompson carefully took Lily's hand. "Perhaps it's time to move to the back room, as planned." Michael nodded, tension coiling through him like a spring. They had prepared for this. The safe house had a fortified interior room, selected specifically because it had no windows and only one entry point. Officer Wilson had insisted on this precaution. As they began to rise, a memory suddenly broke through the surface of Michael's mind, something buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed until this moment. "Wait," he breathed, freezing in place. "I remember something about the day Shadow disappeared." Both dogs turned their heads toward him at the mention of the name, Storm's ears twitching forward. "Richard came by the house that morning," Michael continued slowly, the memory unfolding like a time-lapse flower. "It was 2 days before Sarah's accident. He said he was on leave from Afghanistan, wanted to surprise us. I was confused. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home, but I was in a rush for work, so I let him in, told him to make himself at home." "And the dog disappeared that day?" Mrs. Thompson prompted. Michael nodded, his face paling. "When I came home, Shadow was gone. Richard said he'd left the back gate open by accident. We searched for days. Lily was heartbroken. And 2 days later—" Mrs. Thompson didn't need to finish the sentence. "Sarah was dead," Michael whispered. Her car went off Lakeshore Drive during a snowstorm. The police said her brakes failed. The pieces were falling together now, forming a picture so monstrous Michael could barely comprehend it. He took Shadow first, Michael realized, his voice hollow. Like a test run. Then he killed Sarah. His hands began to shake. But why? What could possibly justify? A soft creak from the front porch interrupted him. Storm and Thunder were instantly alert, their bodies rigid with tension but making no sound, their police training keeping them silent in the face of potential threat. Michael put a finger to his lips, then motioned toward the safe room. Mrs. Thompson nodded, carefully gathering Lily in her arms. The child stirred but didn't wake, exhausted from the day's events. As Mrs. Thompson carried Lily toward the back of the house, Michael reached for the handgun Wilson had left for emergency protection. He'd never fired a weapon outside of a shooting range, but the weight of it now felt grimly necessary. The dogs moved with military precision, positioning themselves on either side of the front door, invisible to anyone looking through the windows. Michael flattened himself against the wall, heart pounding. No further sounds came from outside. Minutes passed in tense silence. Michael began to wonder if they'd heard nothing more than the house settling or a branch against the porch. Then came the unmistakable sound of a key entering the front door lock. Only 3 people had keys to the safe house: Michael, Wilson, and the police captain. None of them were expected until morning. The lock turned with agonizing slowness. Michael raised the gun, aiming at the door as it began to open. A cold draft swept in, carrying with it the scent of snow and something metallic. Gun oil. A shadow filled the doorway, then stepped inside. The porch light behind the figure left their face in darkness, but Michael knew immediately who it was. The height, the bearing, the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. "Hello, Mikey," said Richard Morgan, raising an identical gun to point directly at his brother. Family reunion time. Neither man moved. The dogs remained perfectly still, waiting for the moment to strike. "How did you find us?" Michael asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Richard smiled, the expression lacking any warmth. "You think Wilson's little task force is the only one with police connections? Half the department's on the Brennan payroll." "What do you want, Richard?" "What I've always wanted," Richard replied simply. "What should have been mine." Michael's finger tensed on the trigger. "You killed Sarah," he said, the words barely making it past his throat. "Your own sister-in-law." "Collateral damage," Richard shrugged. "Nothing personal." The casual dismissal of Sarah's life ignited something in Michael, a rage so pure it burned away the fear. "Nothing personal? You targeted my wife, stole my daughter's dog, and it was nothing personal?" "This was never about Sarah," Richard said, taking another step into the room. "Or the dog. It was always about you, brother. Always has been." In the shadows of the hallway behind Richard, Michael caught a glimpse of movement. Mrs. Thompson, returning from the safe room. Her eyes widened as she registered the standoff. "Mom and Dad always favored you," Richard continued, oblivious to the elderly woman's presence. "Perfect Michael, gifted Michael, Michael the doctor, saving lives while I was just the troubled kid, the afterthought." "That's not true," Michael protested. "They loved you." "They tolerated me," Richard snapped, his composure cracking. "Do you know what Dad said when I told him I was enlisting? At least you'll have structure. Not pride, not concern. Just relief that someone else would be responsible for keeping me in line." As Richard spoke, Storm and Thunder exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. Michael fought to keep his eyes on his brother, not wanting to draw attention to the dogs. "So you faked your death," Michael said, trying to keep him talking. "Created a new identity." "Best decision I ever made," Richard confirmed. "Richard Morgan had a ceiling. Richard Blackwell could be anyone, do anything." A smile ghosted across his face. "And the irony of becoming a cop?" priceless. I learned everything about how to break the law by enforcing it. And Sarah was killing her part of your grand plan? Richard's expression darkened. Sarah was a complication. She recognized me one day, saw me by chance at a gas station. I was still transforming then, hadn't fully established my new identity. She threatened to tell you I was alive. Michael felt sick. So you cut her brake lines. I gave her a chance to keep quiet, Richard countered. She refused, said you deserved to know the truth. Always so righteous, your Sarah. Michael's hand trembled with the effort of not pulling the trigger. And Shadow, my daughter's puppy. What possible threat was he? For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable. That was an impulse. I saw him in your yard that day. Remembered how you always wanted a dog as a kid, but Dad said I was allergic. His jaw tightened. Another sacrifice for perfect Michael. So you stole a child's puppy out of spite, Michael said, disgust evident in his voice. I took him to the canine training facility, Richard said defensively. Gave him a purpose. He's a damn good police dog now. As if understanding the conversation, Storm let out a low growl. Richard's attention snapped to the sound, registering the dog's positions for the first time. His face paled slightly. Call them off, Michael, he said, his gun hand steadying, or I'll put them down. They don't answer to me, Michael replied truthfully. They're police dogs, remember? Mrs. Thompson had silently moved closer, now standing just a few feet behind Richard. In her hands was a heavy cast-iron skillet from the kitchen. Where's the evidence, Michael? Richard demanded, his patience visibly thinning. The USB drive and the microchip. Hand them over and maybe we can work something out. Work something out? Michael repeated incredulously. You killed my wife. You're threatening my family. What exactly do you think we can work out? Richard's expression hardened. I'm not asking again. Where's the evidence? Safe, Michael replied. Far from here. It was a lie. The evidence was locked in the safe room with Lily, but Richard's widening eyes suggested he believed it. Damn it, Michael! Richard took another step forward, raising his gun higher. Always so stubborn, so self-righteous. You think you've won? You think— The cast-iron pan connected with the back of Richard's head with a sickening crack. Mrs. Thompson's arthritis might have slowed her down, but years of kneading bread had kept her arms strong. Richard stumbled forward, his gun discharging into the ceiling as he fell. In that moment, Storm and Thunder launched into action, trained instincts taking over. Thunder knocked the gun from Richard's hand while Storm pinned him to the floor, massive jaws hovering inches from his throat. You always did talk too much, Richard Morgan, Mrs. Thompson said calmly, still holding the skillet. Some folks just love the sound of their own voice. Michael rushed forward, securing Richard's dropped weapon and training both guns on his brother. Blood trickled from where the pan had connected with his skull, but Richard was still conscious, glaring up at them with hatred burning in his eyes. It's over, Richard, Michael said quietly. You've lost. As if in response to his words, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The gunshot had not gone unnoticed by the officers patrolling nearby. Richard's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. It's never over, little brother, he whispered. Not for us. The interrogation room at Northridge Police Department was deliberately uncomfortable. Harsh fluorescent lighting, hard metal chairs, and a temperature kept just cool enough to make most people long for a sweater. For 3 hours, Richard Morgan had sat handcuffed to the table, refusing to speak except to demand a lawyer. On the other side of the one-way glass, Michael stood with Officer Wilson, watching his brother. The family resemblance was undeniable now that Michael knew to look for it. The same jawline, similar eyes, though Richard's held none of the compassion that defined Michael's. He hasn't said anything useful, Wilson reported, flipping through his notes. But the evidence speaks for itself. The USB drive contained detailed records of every transaction between Richard and the Brennan cartel going back 3 years. Names, dates, amounts, it's everything we need to dismantle their entire operation. And the microchip from Storm's neck? Michael asked, unable to tear his gaze from his brother's face. Even more damning, Wilson replied grimly. It contains audio recordings. Your wife, Sarah, confronting Richard about his fake death. His threats against her. Their final conversation the day before she died. Michael's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the edge of the observation desk to steady himself. She recorded him? Wilson nodded. Sarah was smart. She must have suspected he might try something. The timestamp shows she made the recording just hours before her accident. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She mentions being afraid for Shadow. Says Richard had taken the dog as a warning. She knew, Michael whispered. All this time, she knew he was alive, knew he was dangerous. There's more, Wilson continued reluctantly. The recording includes Richard explicitly threatening your family if Sarah exposed his new identity. He says, and I quote, "I've worked too hard creating Richard Blackwell to let you destroy him. If you tell Michael I'm alive, I'll take everything from him, starting with that precious daughter of his." The room seemed to tilt as Michael processed this information. Sarah had kept Richard's secret to protect Lily. She died with that burden. "Where's the district attorney?" Michael asked, his voice hardening. "On his way," Wilson assured him. "With this evidence, Richard's looking at multiple life sentences: murder, conspiracy, corruption, drug trafficking. He'll never see the outside of a prison again." The door to the observation room opened and Officer Parker entered, moving carefully with the aid of a cane. Though still recovering from his gunshot wound, he'd insisted on being present. "How's Lily doing?" Parker asked, gesturing to the chair Wilson quickly offered him. "Oh, she's with Mrs. Thompson at the hospital's family center," Michael replied. "The dogs refused to leave her side, so we got special permission. The child psychologist thinks their presence is helping her process everything." Parker nodded. "Those dogs have better instincts than most humans I know. The way Storm recognized your daughter after all these years? It's remarkable." "DNA confirmed it this morning," Wilson added. "Storm is definitely the dog formerly known as Shadow. Richard stole him from your yard, had him entered into the K-9 program under falsified documentation." In the interrogation room, the door opened to admit a distinguished woman in a tailored suit. Richard's attorney, no doubt arranged by his cartel connections. The lawyer sat beside Richard, whispering urgently. "We should go in now," Wilson decided, gathering his files. "The DA wants to offer him a deal in exchange for information on the Brennan organization's leadership." "A deal?" Michael's voice rose in disbelief. "After everything he's done? Multiple life sentences instead of the death penalty," Wilson clarified. "He's still never getting out, but the DA prioritizes dismantling the entire cartel." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "I want to talk to him. Alone." Wilson and Parker exchanged concerned glances. "That's not protocol," Wilson began. 5 minutes, Michael insisted. "Before you offer any deals. I need to understand why. He owes me that much." After a moment of consideration, Wilson nodded. 5 minutes. No physical contact. We'll be watching through the glass." Richard's lawyer left the room with obvious reluctance as Michael entered. The brothers regarded each other across the metal table, one in handcuffs, one carrying invisible chains of grief. "Come to gloat, Mikey?" Richard asked, leaning back as far as his restraints would allow. Michael sat down slowly. "Why, Sarah?" he asked simply. Richard's expression remained impassive. "I told you yesterday. She recognized me, threatened to expose me." "That's not what I'm asking." Michael replied, leaning forward. Why did marrying Sarah and having Lily make me a target? What did my happiness cost you? Something flashed in Richard's eyes, an emotion so raw it momentarily cracked his composed facade. You want to know why? Richard's voice dropped to a near whisper. Because you got everything. Always. The grades, the praise, the future. Even when I saved your life, they still loved you more. Saved my life? Michael repeated, genuinely confused. Silver Lake, summer of '91. You were 8, I was 11. Richard's eyes bore into Michael's. You don't even remember, do you? Michael frowned, searching his memory. We went swimming. I got caught in some weeds. You were drowning, Richard corrected sharply. I pulled you out, gave you CPR like Dad taught us in Boy Scouts. You weren't breathing for almost 2 minutes. The memory returned in fragments, the panic of being trapped underwater, the burning in his lungs, then waking up on the shore with Richard leaning over him, their parents rushing down from the picnic area. I remember, Michael said slowly. You did save me. And what happened after? Richard demanded, a lifetime of bitterness surfacing. Mom and Dad hugged you, cried over you, took you to the hospital. And me? Dad said I should have been watching you better, said it was irresponsible to let you swim out so far. Michael sat back, stunned. I never knew that. Of course you didn't, Richard scoffed. Perfect Michael, the golden child, couldn't bear a tarnished image of his parents. That doesn't justify what you did, Michael said after a moment. Nothing justifies murdering Sarah. I gave her a choice, Richard insisted, his voice rising slightly. Keep quiet about seeing me or face consequences. She chose poorly. She chose to protect our daughter, Michael corrected. The recording proves it. You threatened Lily, and Sarah decided to keep your secret rather than risk you hurting her. Richard's expression flickered with surprise. Recording. What recording? The one stored on the microchip implanted in Shadow's neck, Michael replied, watching realization dawn on his brother's face. Sarah was smarter than you gave her credit for. She knew she needed insurance. For the first time, Richard's confidence visibly wavered. You're bluffing. The chip contains your voice threatening Sarah and Lily the day before you sabotaged her car. It has everything, Richard. You're never getting out of prison. Richard lunged forward as far as his handcuffs would allow. She deserved what she got. Coming at me with her self-righteous concern, her "Richard, you need help" speeches, as if I was broken, as if I needed fixing. Michael maintained his calm, though inside, rage burned white-hot. You took my wife from me. You took my daughter's mother. You still had Lily, Richard snarled. You still had a family. What did I have? A fake name? A fake life? Your choices, Michael replied simply. At every turn, Richard, you chose this path. You chose to fake your death, to create a new identity, to work with criminals, to threaten Sarah, to cut her brake lines. You made those choices. Not me, not our parents. You. Richard fell silent, his jaw working as if physically chewing over Michael's words. The district attorney is offering you a deal, Michael continued, his voice steady. Give up the Brennan organization, and they won't pursue the death penalty. And if I refuse? Then you'll face the maximum penalty for each of your crimes, including Sarah's murder. Including the attempt on Officer Parker's life, including the attempted kidnapping of my daughter. Richard studied his brother's face, searching for weakness or uncertainty. Finding none, he smiled, a cold, empty expression. You know what the difference is between us, Mikey. I can live with my choices. Can you live with yours? Michael stood, pushing back from the table. My choice is to protect what's left of my family from you. And yes, I can absolutely live with that. Before you go, Richard called as Michael reached for the door handle. Ask yourself this. If I hadn't taken Shadow, if I hadn't killed Sarah, would you ever have noticed how distant you'd become from Lily? Would you have continued burying yourself in work, avoiding your own daughter because she reminds you too much of her mother? The words struck like physical blows. Michael froze, his hand on the door. That's right, Richard continued, his voice softening with false sympathy. In a twisted way, I brought you back to your daughter. You should thank me. Michael turned slowly to face his brother one last time. You didn't bring me back to Lily. Storm did. Shadow did. The dog you stole showed more loyalty, more humanity than you ever could. He paused, studying the man who shared his blood but none of his heart. Goodbye, Richard. I won't be visiting you in prison. As Michael left the interrogation room, he found Wilson and Parker waiting in the hallway, their expressions grim. He won't take the deal, Michael said with certainty. His pride won't let him. Wilson nodded. Then we'll proceed with the full prosecution. The DA is confident we have more than enough evidence. What Richard said about you being distant from Lily, Parker began hesitantly, confirming they'd heard everything through the observation room's audio feed. Was true, Michael admitted, the confession painful but necessary. After Sarah died, I didn't know how to be both parents, so I became neither. I buried myself in work, left Lily with sitters and neighbors. He swallowed hard. I failed her. You protected her, Wilson countered. You provided for her, and now you have a second chance to do better. Michael's phone chimed with a text message from Mrs. Thompson. Lily asking for you. Dog's getting restless. I need to go, he said, already moving toward the exit. My daughter needs me. As he walked away, Michael felt something shift inside him, as if a burden he'd carried for 2 years was finally beginning to lift. Richard was right about one thing. Michael had been absent from Lily's life, even while physically present. But that would change now. Sarah was gone, but Lily remained, and remarkably, Shadow, now Storm, had returned to them, as if guided by some invisible thread of loyalty that even death and distance couldn't sever. Outside the police station, snow continued to fall, covering yesterday's tracks with fresh white possibility. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that was still unwritten. And for the first time since losing Sarah, Michael Morgan was ready to face it head-on. Spring came to Minnesota like a gentle awakening. Snow retreated into memory, replaced by tentative green shoots and the first brave crocuses pushing through thawed earth. At the Morgan cabin on Pine Hollow Road, the transformation was mirrored in more than just the landscape. 3 months had passed since the night a little girl took in 2 freezing dogs and unwittingly set in motion the unraveling of a 2-year-old tragedy. 3 months since the truth about Sarah Morgan's death came to light. 3 months since Michael Morgan faced his brother across an interrogation table and chose to move forward rather than remain anchored to grief. On this particular Saturday morning, the cabin's front door stood open to welcome the mild breeze. Through it came the sound of laughter, Lily's high, clear voice mingling with her father's deeper chuckle. In the newly fenced backyard, Michael was attempting to throw a frisbee, while Lily and 3 dogs watched with varying degrees of amusement. You're really bad at this, Daddy, Lily giggled as the frisbee veered wildly off course. I'm a surgeon, not a frisbee champion, Michael protested, though his eyes crinkled with mirth. My talents lie elsewhere. Storm, who still answered to both names, Shadow when it was just family, and Storm when in working mode, trotted over to retrieve the wayward disc. The scar on his flank had healed completely, leaving only a faint line beneath his fur as testament to that snowy night. Beside Lily sat Thunder, who had become a frequent visitor thanks to Officer Parker's regular stops at the Morgan household. The third dog, a German Shepherd puppy with oversized paws and boundless energy, wove excitedly between everyone's legs. She was the newest addition to their family, a puppy from Storm's litter with a police training dog, given to Lily as a surprise when Richard's trial concluded. "Echo, sit!" Lily commanded, and the puppy promptly planted her bottom on the grass, tail still wagging furiously. "She's a quick learner," observed Kevin Parker from his seat on the porch steps. Though still using a cane, his recovery had progressed remarkably. Twice weekly, he brought Thunder to visit while he helped Lily train Echo in basic commands. "Takes after her father," Parker added, watching as Storm dropped the frisbee at Michael's feet, then backed away with an expression that somehow conveyed both encouragement and low expectations. Mrs. Thompson emerged from the house carrying a tray of lemonade. At 78, she moved more slowly than she once had, but insisted on maintaining her role as neighborhood matriarch. Since the events of that winter night, she had appointed herself unofficial grandmother to Lily, spending several afternoons each week at the Morgan home. "As my Harold used to say," she announced, setting the tray on the porch table, "a family isn't built on blood, but on who'd bleed for you." Michael smiled at the elderly woman with genuine affection. Her quick thinking with a cast-iron skillet had quite possibly saved their lives the night Richard escaped custody. "Your Harold was a wise man," he said, accepting a glass of lemonade. "Wise enough to know when he was outmatched," she replied with a wink. "Which is why he learned to make himself useful in other ways." Parker checked his watch and sighed reluctantly. "I should be heading out soon. Court appointment at 2. The mention of court cast a momentary shadow over the gathering. Richard Morgan's trial was entering its final phase. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The recordings from the microchip, the USB drive's contents, Parker's testimony, and ultimately Richard's own confession, given when he realized the depth of evidence against him. In a final act of spite, he had provided enough information to implicate the entire Brennan organization, but only after ensuring his own fate was sealed. "Any word on the deliberations?" Michael asked quietly, moving to sit beside Parker while Lily continued training Echo under the watchful eyes of Storm and Thunder. "Should have a verdict by Monday," Parker replied. "But it's a formality at this point. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison." Michael nodded, his expression complicated. The brother he had mourned 15 years ago had never truly existed. The man facing justice now was a stranger, wearing a familiar face, a distorted reflection of what might have been. "Have you thought any more about Wilson's offer?" Parker asked, changing the subject. And Officer Wilson had approached Michael about allowing Storm to work part-time with the K-9 unit. The dog's extraordinary intelligence and training were valuable assets, but his attachment to Lily was undeniable. "We're considering a compromise," Michael replied. "Storm stays with us as a family pet, but joins training exercises twice a month to keep his skills sharp. If there's ever a special case where they need him specifically, we'll discuss it." "Sounds reasonable," Parker agreed, watching as Storm demonstrated perfect posture for Echo to imitate. "He's remarkable, maintains his police training while being a perfect family dog." "Shadow was always special," Michael said. "Even as a puppy. Sarah knew it." He paused, swallowing the familiar tightness that came with mentioning her name. "Sometimes I think she's the one who sent him back to us, somehow." Mrs. Thompson, who had settled into a porch rocker with her lemonade, nodded approvingly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, but He always sends help when you need it most." The sound of another vehicle approaching drew their attention to the driveway, where a familiar police cruiser was pulling in. Officer Wilson emerged, carrying a cardboard box. "Hope I'm not interrupting the party," he called as he approached. "Just in time for lemonade," Mrs. Thompson replied, already pouring an extra glass. Wilson set the box on the porch and accepted the drink gratefully. "Thought you might want these," he said to Michael. The prosecutor's office released Sarah's personal effects now that the trial's wrapping up. Michael stared at the box, momentarily frozen. For 2 years, he'd believed Sarah's death was a tragic accident. Her personal items had been returned to him then, her purse, her wedding ring, the contents of her pockets. But during the investigation into Richard's crimes, authorities had discovered additional belongings in a storage unit rented under one of his aliases. "What is it, Daddy?" Lily asked, joining them on the porch with Echo at her heels. Storm and Thunder flanked her protectively, as had become their habit. "Some of Mom's things," Michael explained gently. "Things we didn't know about before." Lily's eyes widened. At 6, her memories of Sarah were already fading, something that kept Michael awake at night, wondering how to preserve his wife's legacy for their daughter. "Can we look at them?" Lily asked hesitantly. Michael exchanged glances with Wilson, who nodded encouragement. "Of course we can, Lilypad. Let's take the box inside." As the others remained on the porch, giving the family privacy, Michael and Lily carried the box to the living room. Storm followed silently, settling beside them as they sat on the couch. With careful hands, Michael opened the cardboard flaps. Inside was an assortment of items that brought Sarah immediately, painfully back to life. Her favorite scarf, a notebook filled with her elegant handwriting, a small camera, and at the bottom a sealed envelope with Michael's name written in her hand. His fingers trembled as he lifted it. "She wrote me a letter," he whispered. "Read it, Daddy," Lily urged, pressing against his side. The envelope had been officially opened and resealed by investigators, the contents examined for evidence. With unsteady hands, Michael extracted a single sheet of paper covered in Sarah's handwriting. "My dearest Michael," he began, his voice catching, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I pray it hasn't, that I'm being paranoid, that I'll tell you all this in person instead, but I can't take that chance." Michael paused, gathering himself before continuing. "Richard is alive. I saw him 3 days ago at the gas station on Route 16. He's changed his appearance, calls himself Richard Blackwell now, and works for the police department. When I confronted him, he threatened me, threatened you, threatened Lily. He took Shadow as a warning of what he could do." Lily gasped softly, her hand finding Storm's fur. "I don't know what he's involved in, but it's dangerous." Michael continued reading. "I've recorded our conversations as evidence, hidden a microchip in a place he'll never think to look. If I can gather enough proof of his threats, I'll go to the authorities. But if something happens to me first, know that I love you both more than life itself." Michael's voice faltered. Storm nudged his hand gently, as if encouraging him to finish. "Don't let grief consume you, my love. Lily needs you. Promise me you'll find joy again, that you'll help our daughter remember laughter. And please, tell her every day how much I adore her, how the sound of her voice makes my heart sing, how watching her grow is the greatest gift I've ever known." Tears flowed freely down Michael's face now, dropping onto the paper. Lily was crying too, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I've hidden something for Lily in Shadow's doghouse, a memory box with letters for her birthdays, pictures, small treasures. If Shadow returns, he'll lead her to it. If not, look beneath the loose board under his water dish." Michael looked up sharply at this. "Shadow's doghouse is still in the storage shed," he said. "We never got rid of it." Storm's ears perked up at the mention of the doghouse. He stood, looking intently at Michael, then at the back door. "I think he remembers," Lily whispered, wiping her tears. Michael returned to the letter, reading the final lines. "All my love, forever and always, Sarah." For a long moment, they sat in silence, absorbing the weight of Sarah's words. Then Storm whined softly, pawing at Michael's knee. "Should we look, Daddy?" Lily asked. "For Mom's memory box?" Michael nodded, carefully refolding the letter. "Yes, sweetheart. I think that's exactly what we should do. Outside, they explained to the others. Parker offered to help Michael retrieve the old doghouse from the shed while Mrs. Thompson held Lily's hand. Storm led the way, moving with purpose toward the storage building at the edge of the property. The wooden doghouse was dusty but intact. Michael and Parker carried it to the yard and set it down. Storm immediately began pawing at the floor inside it. "Look," Lily pointed. "There's a loose board." Michael knelt and lifted the plank. Beneath it, wrapped in waterproof material, was a metal box. His hands shook as he carefully extracted it and handed it to Lily. "It's yours, sweetheart. Mom left it for you." The backyard fell silent as Lily opened the box. Inside were envelopes labeled with future birthdays, a small photo album, a jewelry box containing Sarah's grandmother's locket, and a USB drive marked Family Videos. "She made sure you'd have pieces of her," Mrs. Thompson said softly, her weathered hand resting on Lily's shoulder. "Even when she feared the worst." "Mom knew Shadow would come home," Lily said with absolute certainty, looking at Storm with adoration. "She knew he'd find me again." That evening, after their guests had departed, Michael, Lily, and the dogs gathered in the living room. On the television played videos from the USB drive, Sarah laughing as she chased toddler Lily through a sprinkler, Sarah singing lullabies, Sarah telling stories about how she and Michael met. "She's so beautiful," Lily murmured, leaning against her father as they watched. "Yes," Michael agreed, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Inside and out. On the floor, Echo had finally exhausted herself and fallen asleep against Storm's side. The older dog remained alert, his eyes occasionally moving from the screen to Lily and Michael, as if ensuring they were okay. "Daddy," Lily said as one video ended, "I think Mom would be happy now." Michael looked down at his daughter's earnest face. "Why do you think that, Lily Pad?" "Because we're not sad all the time anymore. You laugh again. We have Shadow back. We have Echo now, too." She gestured to the sleeping puppy. "And we remember Mom together, not separately." Michael's throat tightened with emotion. When had his 6-year-old become so wise? "I think you're right," he managed. "Mom would be very happy." As the next video began to play, Michael found himself truly believing those words. The grief hadn't disappeared. It never would. But it had transformed into something gentler, something that could coexist with joy and hope. Outside, the last of winter's snow had finally melted away. In its place, wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the yard, purple crocuses, Sarah's favorites, pushing through the earth in vibrant defiance of the darkness that had preceded them. Life continued its cycles of loss and renewal. A season of cold had given way to warmth. A time of grief had evolved into healing. And a little girl who once took in 2 freezing dogs had unknowingly set in motion her family's journey back to wholeness. As the evening deepened into night, Michael Morgan looked around his living room, at his daughter, at the dogs that had become their guardians, at the images of Sarah smiling from the television screen, and felt for the first time in years truly home. "Thank you," he whispered, the words meant for Sarah, for the dogs, for the mysterious workings of fate that had brought them to this moment. "Thank you for bringing us back to each other." Storm's ears twitched at the words, and his intelligent eyes met Michael's with what seemed like understanding. Some bonds, his gaze seemed to say, transcend even the deepest winter. Outside, spring continued its gentle reclamation, covering old scars with new life, much like the family within, finding their way forward together, one day at a time. Sometimes, life gives us second chances in the most unexpected ways. In this story, a little girl's simple act of kindness toward 2 freezing dogs set in motion a healing journey that mended a broken family. Like Michael and Lily, many of us have weathered seasons of grief where happiness feels impossible to reclaim. We build walls around our hearts, distancing ourselves from those who need us most. But often it's the small moments of connection, whether with a loyal pet, a wise neighbor, or memories of loved ones, that guide us back to joy. Sarah's final message reminds us that even when someone leaves this world, their love remains, threading through our lives in ways we might not immediately recognize. No matter how harsh your winter has been, spring always returns. The wounds may leave scars, but they also make space for new beginnings and deeper appreciations of the simple blessings surrounding us. Has an unexpected connection, perhaps with an animal, a neighbor, or even a memory, ever helped you find your way back to happiness? Or what small act of kindness have you witnessed that created ripples of healing beyond what anyone could have imagined? Please share your stories in the comments below.